for waiting, everyone. Good evening to tonight's Foxborough Board of Health meeting. Currently, the meeting is being held in the Foxborough Town Hall, and we are also being broadcasted on Zoom. The Zoom link is online on our agenda under public meetings, and we are also being broadcasted live through Foxborough Cable Access, which is also available on YouTube. And we can begin with our presenters. I believe they're all here. Tonight we're going to have a presentation from University of Connecticut, technical assessment. It's a technical assessment to brownfields on the Foxborough property identified as 131 Moore Street. So if they can begin.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, I'm a little unfamiliar with this. Should I put my video on for this, or should we just get right into just sharing the PowerPoint presentation?
Sharing the presentation is fine.
Whatever you want.
All right, great.
So technical difficulties aside.
Any updates on anything else?
Yeah.
On the housing?
Do you want?
Well, I can say, so yeah, so the housing code has changed as of last week.
Mm-hmm.
So the state housing code is different. I can actually, so we did have one complaint that I did respond to. Oak Knoll Farms, actually. We received a complaint from another health agent.
Closer to you.
Sorry. So we received a complaint from the Attleboro health agent regarding Oak Knoll Farms. I guess they were selling some unbranded meat, not labeled, in cryogenically sealed packaging. Not sure where it was from. When I went to do the inspection, I inspected, and I found meat of an unknown source, so I issued a cease and desist.
Okay.
And that was sent off last Friday, I believe. So that was pretty much the only event I would give the board an update with. I haven't heard back yet, but all the product was removed from the shelves before I left. So I don't think there is a danger to the public anymore. I think that's all set.
Okay.
I think that's really it for department updates.
Yeah. Well, while we wait, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
In regards to,
Mike.
oh, I think I'm heard, I can be heard. In regards to the South Street property and receivership for the state, anything from the Attorney General's office?
Yes, so the Attorney General's office, they have completed the paperwork, ready to file. Unfortunately, because of the housing code change, their documents are now a little bit off because of you have to refer a different code. And so they're reworking that document, but it's ready to be submitted. It was submitted to the town's attorney for his approval, and he's fine with it as well. So it's still moving forward.
Cool. Oh, looks like we got something. Great. Oh, and can you still hear us?
Yes, yeah. I think we should be set to go.
All right,
That
so you
was
can begin
a
whenever
bit
you're
of a
ready.
nightmare, but yeah, seems to be all good. All right, so I was enlisted by the Brownfield Assistance Program, the Technical Assistance to Brownfield Program of UConn back in January at the beginning of the academic semester to look at the former Mansfield Bleachery for the town of Foxborough. The general desire of the municipality in requesting this report was to sort of put together a comprehensive document about the history of the site, prior environmental reports that had been conducted on the site, and sort of an amassing of the just existing historical record in order to inform town members and perhaps future developers on the history of the site and its current status relating to environmental law, regulation, and the enforcement thereof. This will take around 25 minutes, give or take, maybe 5, so we can get right into it. As many residents of Foxborough are likely aware, the town has a rich industrial history from the 19th and 20th centuries. There was a large straw hat factory in the town in the center of the downtown area. This was the Union Straw Works, but like a lot of industrial communities in the area, especially in the Northeast, the 20th century, especially the late 20th century, was quite hard for the town of Foxborough, especially such as the aforementioned straw hat factory. There was a fire on the premises that destroyed the factory. However, unlike the Union Straw Works, which was the property was able to be repurposed into the town's post office, the other brownfields and industrial sites, such as the Mansfield Bleachery, have been unable to sort of repurpose into modern sort of uses, as well as the Union Straw Works property. And we're going to be talking about one of those properties today. As aforementioned, on the title slide, this was requested out of a desire for a comprehensive historical report for investors and developers, and also to be provided for individuals in the town, community members who are concerned by the presence of this sort of a storied industrial site, given the sort of central location of the town between the cities of Boston, Providence, and to the west, Worcester. There's an understandable desire to look into the history of this site and see if it can be potentially remediated in the future. Just a brief aside on methodology before we really get into the weeds of things. This was mostly put together by querying of Massachusetts government databases. The first listed bullet point there is Mass DEP's data portal, which was the #1 source of information here. Any maps you see were likely put together by myself using shapefiles taken from the tax assessor's database, and anything relating to ownership or the transfer thereof was usually found through the database of the Secretary of the Commonwealth of the state of Massachusetts. There was also extensive reviewing of existing environmental reports. Quite useful in this was the 1991 screening site inspection conducted by TRC companies on behalf of the EPA. There's also a large amount of consulting of historical records, particularly from the Conservation Commission, Historical Society, and Historical Commission. And finally, I would be quite remiss not to mention that our site visit back in February with Deputy Fire Chief David Laracy was, at least for me, very helpful in establishing my foundational knowledge of the site. And I was going back to those conversations a lot throughout the course of this report's production. But we can get right into it. As I believe the main speaker of the Board of Health mentioned at the beginning, the site in question is at 131 Moore Street in the town of Foxborough. It's in a mixed-use zoning district, 22 acres in size. This is a former industrial facility, and primarily what we are dealing with when we talk about the former Mansfield Bleachery is a lot of illegal dumping. There's an abandoned parcel on the site, and there's also a burned down building that we'll also be speaking of briefly. All right, so here's a site map of the Mansfield Bleachery. This was made using shapefiles from the tax assessor's database, as stated before. This is sort of an abbreviated version of parcel IDs that were given by the tax assessor's database. All of these are on map 149 of the town of Foxborough, and these numbers that you see 4 through 10 are abbreviations of lots on that map. So we'll be going through these sites by sort of their lot number. So we'll be talking about parcels 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. We'll also be talking about some off-site contamination that also exists in the woods to the north and northeast as well of parcels 7 and 8. That will be towards the end of the findings section at the end of the presentation. But with that in mind, let's get right into this. We'll be starting with parcel 9. This is the eastern portion of the former Mansfield Bleachery. This is the front-facing section of the site, which abuts upon 131 Moore Street. This is a 2.2 acre lot. It's owned by SDT Realty LLC, excuse me. It's a 3-story brick building that was historically used as a glue factory and then as a as part of the Mansfield Bleachery complex. Currently, it's used for a number of assorted businesses. Right now, there's, I believe, 3 different wooden upholstery manufacturers in the building. Moving on, we have the western portion of the former Mansfield Bleachery. This is a much smaller parcel that was sold separately from the eastern portion, only 0.87 acres as compared to the 2.2 acres of the prior lot. This was owned, or this is currently owned, I should say, by CRO Realty Trust LLC. Again, a 3-story brick building historically used as a glue factory and then bleachery. This is occupied by a number of assorted businesses, as you can see, an archery range, a judo and jiu-jitsu dojo. We also have a number of different businesses in here, really. It's quite a multi-use center, and this is parcel 10. Oh, and I should mention as well, there's a map of the site included on each slide that has the parcel in question highlighted, just in case you lose your bearings, because this is, as we go through, it will be quite complicated keeping track of all these different parcels. This is the Summit Casting parcel, parcel 8. This is one of the main concerns that was identified by the municipality when we were first contacted. The TAB program was first contacted. This is a 1.69 acre parcel owned by the Moore Street Realty Corporation. It's a 1 to 2 story industrial facility that's connected to the back of the aforementioned 3-story brick building, on particularly on the portion on parcel 9, the eastern portion of the Mansfield Bleachery. This was mainly used as a foundry, but what that would really entail is mold design, sand mold fabrication, casting, machine castings, and also for a number of sites on the, or excuse me, parcels on this site, it was also used for storage, shipping, and receiving. Currently, the parcel is abandoned, though Deputy Fire Chief David Laracy did mention that this is used off and on by parties, both by high schoolers, college students, and other individuals throughout the year. And this will be parcel 8 for future reference. Moving on, we have the northern portion of the common properties. This is the largest parcel on the site. This is a 10.14 acre parcel owned by Irwin and Marie Common. It is a mostly undeveloped parcel, mostly wooded. In the past, this was used by the Mansfield Bleachery as a wastewater treatment plant. It was also used by the Mansfield Bleachery and the subsequent owner named Theodore Ricard Jr. as a site of illegal dumping. Just a small technicality, this is technically a 2 different parcels, 1 lot and 1 with a lot cut. That would be the second parcel listed, 149-006-001. But just for ease of legibility and accessibility, I find it much easier to refer to this just as parcel 6, especially given it has always been owned by one person. It's never been owned separately in accordance with that separate, parceling distinction. The second portion of the common property is the southern portion, parcel 5, as highlighted on the site map down in the center of the screen. This is a 2 acre lot owned by Irwin and Marie Common. The only real structure on this site, parcel, is a 4,000 square foot Quonset hut. It has no utilities to speak of, no heating, no sprinkler system, anything of the sort. This would have been used by the Mansfield Bleachery for dye storage. The undeveloped lands surrounding the Quonset hut were also used for illegal dumping by the Mansfield Bleachery and Theodore Ricard Jr. once again. It was also used by the Commons in previous decades as an auto body, and currently the Commons are using it for a landscaping business. This is parcel 5 for future reference. Duke's Place, parcel 7. This is a 1.19 acre parcel owned by CJW LLC. It's a 1 to 2 story industrial facility, much like Summit Casting. This is connected to the Summit Casting facility on the western side. Historically, this was used as part of the Mansfield Bleachery complex. It was also used by a plastic reclaiming company. It's also been used for storage, shipping, and receiving. And currently, it's used by a Freon recapture specialist. You can see in the leftern portion of the photo at the top, you can see a number of refrigerators actually behind the trees there. That would be where the Freon is being recaptured. and this is parcel 7. And the final parcel we'll be talking about is parcel 4, a 2.4 acre parcel owned by Teltron Engineering, or in a more official capacity, they are known as the Morse Estate LLC. 2 structures exist on this parcel. There's a 1-story industrial building occupied by Teltron Engineering and a 2-story residential unit owned by the owners of Teltron Engineering. Historically, this was used as part of the Bleachery complex, though we're a little unclear from when to when. There seems to be an indication that this building was constructed in 1948, but there is reason to believe that the dates of construction listed in the town's tax assessor's database actually reflect the date of entry rather than the actual date of construction, and as such, it's a little tricky to really place when this 1-story industrial building was created. But currently, that 1-story industrial building is occupied by Teltron Engineering, a precision sheet metal parts manufacturer. And this will be called Parcel 4. So just to recap, because that was quite a bit of information, I've made a table of the 5 parcels, the 7 parcels of the site, including sort of an abbreviated naming for the parcel, the owner currently, and the acreage of the parcel, and the extent of development, or the number of buildings on the parcel. And as you can notice, 5 of these parcels have been highlighted in red. These are going to be the parcels that we talk about in the findings of the report, which are coming up right ahead. So first and foremost, as mentioned before, Summit Casting was a parcel identified by the Board of Health as a primary area of concern for the site. Contaminants on Summit Casting are a number 2 and number 6 fuel oil release. This was a result of a leaking 20,000 gallon UST that was discovered in 1987. That UST, I should say, stands for underground storage tank. This tank was installed maybe 35 years prior in 1952, and it was used for the heating of the facility, mostly of the Summit Casting facility. There's also a concern of a release of elevator hydraulic oil that comes from an abandoned elevator that sort of moves between the 1- and 2-story portions of the building. There's also a concern of volatile organic compounds that comes from a pile of waste casting that is located to the north of the Summit Casting facility on the exterior of the building. As will be the case for most every parcel on the site identified as an area of concern, the contaminants on this particular parcel are a concern given their ability to contaminate nearby soils, groundwater, down gradient soils, as well as the site's sluiceway, which runs underneath the building, and the Rumford River, which the sluiceway of the site deposits into. Now would be as good a time as any to talk about the current state of compliance with environmental regulations on the site. Pursuant to the discovery of this leaking 20,000 gallon UST, the Mass DEP released a notice of responsibility to parcels 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's a small mistake there. I forgot to correct. That's my bad. But yes, the parcels that are currently affected by this notice of responsibility are parcels 5, 6, 7, and 8, which would be the common properties, Summit Casting, and Duke's Place. This notice of responsibility pertains exclusively to the leaking UST found on parcel 8 in 1986 and removed in the same year. This notice of responsibility requires the testing of soil and groundwaters on the aforementioned 4 parcels, the removal of the contaminated mediums, and continued testing for a number of months into the future until there is confidence that this contamination was removed. Now, it should be noted this notice of responsibility doesn't pertain to the release of hydraulic elevator oil found on Summit Casting, as that was only identified later in around 2002 by a later report. And it also doesn't pertain to the identified volatile organic compounds in the pile of waste sand, as that was found to be, at the time, underneath recommended levels of volatile organic compounds. In other words, that pile of waste sand was not found to be a concern, and as such, its removal was not required by this notice of responsibility. So moving back to the Summit Casting parcel, remediation that has occurred on this parcel, that UST, as I said, was removed in 1986, but nevertheless, the parcel is still in a state of noncompliance with the 1986 notice of responsibility. That is largely because the Phase 4 remedy implementation plan that was commissioned by the owners of Summit Casting was never actually implemented. The reason being that the remedy implementation plan that was completed in 2003 listed that removal of the soils that were contaminated and just overall cost of remediation would be something to the tune of $250,000. In response, the owners of Summit Casting have claimed financial inability. They did so for about a decade and a half until recently, where they ceased to file paperwork for financial inability for an unknown reason and have existed in a state of noncompliance with the order ever since. Relevant reports, I won't go into too much detail on what all of these reports sort of detail and indicate, but an important thing to note is that Summit Casting on the site is unique in that it has received many Phase 2 through 4 comprehensive site assessments, which basically means that an environmental agency was commissioned to do a parcel-specific assessment of contamination on this specific parcel. As we move forward through the parcels, you'll see that there is a distinct lack of Phase 1, 2, 3, or 4 investigations of these parcels, which just indicates that there has not really ever been, for these coming parcels, really any investigation into the specific contamination which exists on those parcels. Summit Casting is really the only one that's received this level of historical scrutiny by environmental agencies. The next parcel we'll be speaking of is both parcels 5 and 6. It seems it felt logical to include these as one slide, given that any contamination that exists on these two parcels is either due to the Mansfield Bleachery or Theodore Ricard Jr., the next owner of the parcel after the Mansfield Bleachery. And as such, it's not, there's no real point to separate them. The Commons have not, at least there's no reason to suspect that the Commons have done anything to contaminate the site since they became the owners of these two parcels since 1985. But contaminants on these two parcels, given that they were the historic dumping grounds of the Mansfield Bleachery, include bleach related to the bleaching of fabrics, heavy metal dyes related to the dyeing of fabrics, and as well as inks, again, related to the inking and coloring of fabrics at the Mansfield Bleachery. However, related to the practices, or, practices is a generous word, but relating to the operations of Theodore Ricard Jr. Ownership of these parcels, there's also alleged orange and green waste sludges that have been found on the site in the past, as well as a potential even for low-intensity radioactive waste that were dumped in illegal dump sites on parcels 5 and 6. As stated, this is due to historic illegal excavation and dumping and unauthorized landfill creation, both by the Mansfield Bleachery and by Theodore Ricard Jr. And much like Summit Casting, these two parcels, the contaminants identified have a potential to affect the surrounding soils, the wildlife, down gradient soils, and groundwater. To stay on parcels 5 and 6 for a little longer, no remediation has particularly occurred on the the common properties. As such, they are non-compliant with the 1986 Notice of Responsibility. And the reason for that non-compliance really is the lack of a tier classification submittal. And what that really means is, as I was stating earlier, for the common properties, there is a distinct lack of Phase 1 through 4 environmental investigations that would actually pertain to the extent of contamination which exists on these two parcels. And as such, there's no ability for the owners of these two parcels, the Commons, to really submit any sort of paperwork which speaks to the extent of contamination on the site. In other words, to submit a tier classification for their parcels. And as such, until they do any kind of testing on soil or groundwater and remove any contamination which is found on these parcels, they can't really, move forward in remediation of the site. Now we'll move on to Duke's Place. This is parcel 7. Duke's Place, again, has been identified as a site of historic dumping by the Mansfield Bleachery. And as such, there is a potential for bleach, heavy metal dyes, and inks located in illegal dump sites and landfills. There's also a release of mineral oil dielectric fluid from a 2020 transformer fire, which was the result of a motor vehicle accident early in the morning of, I believe it was October of 2020. There's also in various reports, there's reports of waste oil being dumped, again, radioactive waste on the part of Theodore Ricard Jr. Important to note that even though Theodore Ricard Jr. was not an owner of Parcel 7, he nevertheless continued to illegally dump materials on Parcel 7. Also, liquid chemical waste belonging either to Blaine Chemical or Marlin Engineering, which were past tenants of the site. Heavy oil, again, relating to Blaine Chemical and Marlin Engineering, as well as grayish white powder. I list these separately from the contaminants above because there's very little documentation of these contaminants. They're sort of mentioned in a strangely offhanded way in the reports without much documentation of the alleged contaminants. And so I list them separately from the aforementioned contaminants to sort of indicate a slightly lower degree of credibility in my own uninformed, unprofessional opinion. Sources of these contamination, again, illegal excavation, dumping, and the 2020 fire. And again, soils, groundwater, Sluis Way, and Rumford River being potential affected mediums. No real remediation has occurred on Duke's Place either. Again, this is because there really hasn't been much of any parcel-specific investigations relating to Duke's Place. And as such, the owners of Duke's Place can't really submit any paperwork to Mass DEP classifying the tier of contamination that exists on their parcel. So until, there is at minimum a phase 1 investigation of Duke's Place, they cannot really move forward with a classification of the parcel as contamination. You'll see in 2022, there is a phase 1 initial site investigation of Duke's Place. However, that is exclusively related to the release of mineral oil dielectric fluid caused by the transformer fire mentioned on the previous slide. And as such, it didn't really look into the extent of contamination that was caused by the release of oil and fuel by the 1986 leaking UST on Summit Casting. And so there is a phase 1 listed for this parcel, but it doesn't really go into the detail that is needed for a tier classification submittal. The final parcel that we'll be talking about is Teltron Engineering, parcel 4. This parcel was also used by the Mansfield Bleachery for the dumping of bleach, heavy metal dyes, and inks. The sources, again, historic illegal excavation, dumping, and landfill creation. One report, I believe it was the 1991 screening site inspection by TRC companies on behalf of the EPA. They allude to the fact that this one-story industrial building occupied by Teltron Engineering may be occupied, or excuse me, may have been used for waste dye disposal during the years of the bleachery. However, this is more of just a suggestion. And as such, it's not a confirmed source of contamination. Although we can say with relative certainty that notwithstanding the possibility of waste dye disposal on that one-story building, there was still creation of illegal dump sites and landfills on the parcel surrounding that industrial building. And again, we're looking at the contamination of soils, groundwater, and down gradient soils. So there is an unknown level of remediation at Teltron Engineering. There is a large potential, in fact, for undocumented remediation that has occurred on the parcel. During the site visit back in February that the TAB team conducted with Deputy Fire Chief David Laracy, he spoke actually quite highly of the current owners of Teltron Engineering or rather of Parcel 4 Teltron Engineering. He spoke to the possibility of undocumented remediation that had occurred on the site that had just not been submitted to Mass DEP. However, we reached out to to Teltron Engineering for comments regarding that undocumented remediation, and unfortunately, though they did get back to us, it was just too late in the process of producing this report for us to confirm these allegations of potential undocumented remediation. We were already too far along in the process to go back and confirm these possibilities. Nevertheless, despite the possibility of contamination, despite Parcel 4 existing down gradient from the Summit Casting oil release, Parcel 4 is in a state of compliance with the 1986 Notice of Responsibility, if only because it was not included in that Notice of Responsibility. And as you can see, Teltron Engineering is mentioned in very few reports that were reviewed by the TAB team. Really only the 1980 preliminary assessment conducted by the EPA and the 1991 screening site inspection conducted on behalf of the EPA. So a final brief mentioning of offsite contamination. This is located again in the woods to the north and northeast of Parcel 8, the Summit Casting parcel. This is, if you're interested in the ID of these parcels, this is 13613 and 13724. What we're looking at here is landfills created by prior owners of the site, such as Theodore Ricard Jr., Marlin Engineering, and the Mansfield Bleachery, as well as a number of abandoned tanks, drums, and oil trucks, junked cars. There are a number of still pools of discolored water in these woods. There's also solid waste and refuse piles, a few floating petroleum products, and just a number of stained soils in these woods. During the February site visit conducted by the TAB team, we were able to confirm a good number of these alleged sort of contaminants or pieces of waste on the offsite parcels. However, we didn't. Well, in a word, it was a bit dangerous to confirm all of these. A lot of this stuff, as you can see, is buried underneath large amounts of detritus and fallen leaves. And there was just a possibility that anywhere you stepped, you could, be stepping on an old rusted oil drum or something. So we decided to take a couple pictures and move on. This offsite contamination is mentioned in a couple reports. A 1975 citation that was given to Marlin Engineering accuses them and actually proves the accusation that they were responsible for a good amount of this dumping. And as such, they had a hazardous waste material conveyance license revoked due to their illegal dumping of these materials. However, there's no real documentation that they ever actually removed the hazardous materials which they dumped on this parcel. And as these photos show, and as even a trek into these woods yourself can show, a lot of this contamination is still present and could very well come from a number of different sources. It has really never been investigated in a sufficient capacity to say for sure. All right, so now that we've gone through the findings, it's important to mention some of the data gaps that were encountered on the in the production of this report. Mercifully, there was actually quite a large amount of information relating to the history of the site. The largest gaps in data encountered related to the roughly 80 to 90 years of operation of the Mansfield Bleachery from roughly 1876 or 1890 to 1966. Those years of operation just really are not well documented on. The only documentation that exists concerning the years of operation of the Mansfield Bleachery was found in historical records owned by the Conservation Commission, the Historical Society, and the Historical Commission, but nothing really pertaining to actual licensed environmental reports. And specifically parcels 9 and 10, which are, again, these 3-story brick buildings at the front of the site, which abut upon on Moore Street. These 2 parcels are almost never mentioned in any report. No parcel-specific investigations have been performed on parcels 4, 5, 6, 9, or 10. With a real abundance of parcel-specific investigations being performed on Summit Casting, again, given the release of fuel oil on the site on that specific parcel. There's also no real hazardous building material assessments that are up to date. A number were performed in the past, but they have since expired, and so there's no way of knowing if the materials identified in those reports are still identified as safe for human occupancy in the present day. And even though there have been a number of phase 1 assessments in the past, such on parcels 7 and parcel 8, none of these phase 1 assessments are actually up to date. Sort of their statute of limitations, if you will, has expired. And as such, if any action was to be taken in the future, these phase 1 assessments would need to be renewed and be brought up to current environmental standards. All right, so moving into the final section of this report, we'll talk on next steps. Now, it should just be noted briefly, I am an undergraduate student. I am not a licensed environmental professional, and as such, these next steps are quite general in nature. I am not qualified to speak extensively on, potential paths of remediation, methods thereof, but I can certainly speak briefly on a number of potential options that the town has moving forward. Environmental assessments on all parcels is a generally good idea for this site. This may seem daunting in nature. However, the EPA does offer community-wide assessment grants for sites such as these that have a complicated history of ownership and a complicated parceling status. These can be applied to, site by site. Last semester, I actually worked on one of these community-wide assessment grants for the town of Killingly in Connecticut on a similar site. So there are absolutely methods for receiving federal funding for environmental assessments, mostly through the EPA. Remediation of Summit Casting is an important step and an important next step in the history of this site, in my opinion. There already is a remedy implementation plan that exists, and although this is now out of date by around 2 decades, the contaminants that are in need of remediation and removal are already identified therein. The extent of that contamination is identified, and luckily, due to the soil geology of the site, it's actually looking through the environmental record. You can actually see that due to the composition of the soils on the site, contamination has moved through the soil relatively slowly. And as such, even though the contaminants identified in the 2003 remedy implementation plan have likely spread further, and as such, there would be a larger volume of soil that would need to be removed now, as opposed to back then in 2003. It will not be a vast quantity greater than it was previously. There's sort of one of my advisors was very keen on the phrase, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is right now, which I think applies to this quite well. Finally, hazardous building assessments for on-site structures, especially the Summit Casting building, as you can see located in this picture here, as well as the Quonset hut located on parcel 5 owned by the Commons. These are structures that are just, their construction history is just relatively unknown. There's not any up-to-date report on their building materials used on these structures. And as such, there's just a large potential for, leaded paints, leaded pipes, asbestos-containing materials and insulators, things like this on a number of the structures on the site. For this in particular, again, an EPA community-wide assessment could be quite useful. It could be used for the conducting of a number of hazardous building assessments. And I should also note on the previous slide, remediation of Summit castings could be accomplished through the usage of an EPA cleanup grant. Once phase 1 and 2 investigations of the parcel have been conducted and are up to date, the town could apply to the EPA's cleanup grant program and receive federal funding for the remediation of Summit castings. Given that it was identified to be roughly $250,000 back in 2003, that's well within the range of funding that the EPA has historically given out to these sort of storied contaminated industrial sites. And historically, the EPA has been quite generous in giving these grants out to communities in the Northeast, given their aforementioned, long history of industrial practices throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. And so this all may seem quite daunting, 22 acres thereabout of potential contamination, and at least on the Summit casting parcel, not even adjusted for inflation, near $250,000 of costs and cleanup. However, collaborations with multiple organizations is really the best and proven way to go about these kinds of things. Mass DEP, as shown earlier with the 1986 Notice of Responsibility, Mass DEP is a very useful tool for enforcement of environmental regulation on actors on sites such as these that don't really comply with environmental regulation. The United States EPA is a very useful resource in terms of acquiring funding for community-wide assessment grants and cleanup grants. And finally, the Yukon TAP program is a nonprofit initiatives such as the Yukon TAP program are abound in the Northeast and are more than willing to help towns like Foxborough out with sort of the creation of grant documents and reports such as these to sort of help along in the process of remediation and the furthering of public health. All right, but that concludes the report I had. I'm sorry, I think I went quite a bit over time actually, but I'm glad you sat and listened, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Owen.
Thank you, first off.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I've followed this property for a few years now, and I feel like every time you look at it, it's something new and interesting. So it's good to see everything in one presentation, going as far back as, I don't know, what was that, 50 years worth of investigations? So yeah, thank you. Does anyone on the board have any questions?
I think my questions are beyond what Owen can answer. It's more about historically how little has been done, and understandably from various reporting, it's, I believe, they're just not wanting to, or lack of will is one, lack of funding is the other one I kept hearing. And I think it's just concerning, but it's understandably, Owen, you said you've encountered other northeastern
Oh, yes.
former factory places like this in your research. I'm just kind of curious how long they were at. Like, how long did they take?
Let me think. So I worked on a textile, actually quite a similar site, a textile dyeing facility in Killingly. And that town had, so that facility ceased operations roughly 20 years, I want to say, after the Mansfield Bleachery. In the 80s, I think they shut their doors. And roughly 40 years later, so last year, the town was looking into an EPA cleanup grant. Really, the when we talk about how long these things take, a lot of the time it's not that these things actually take 40 years to complete. It's more that it takes 40 years for sort of the public desire for these things to happen to sort of amass and for the ball to get rolling. If you look at currently over the summer, I'll also be looking at another site in the town of Foxborough, the Evelyn Porter Estate. And if you look at that site, actually, the time between phase one investigation and eventual remediation activities can be oftentimes as brief as 2 years. It's really just a matter of acquiring public support, engaging the community to sort of amass that kind of public support for remediation, which requires a level of sort of engagement and information regarding the level of contamination that exists and the potential health effects thereof, and then contacting the aforementioned agencies such as the EPA to acquire federal funding for the cleanup. So it is difficult to get the ball rolling. Absolutely. I think you can see here, people have been trying and failing to get at least Summit Casting cleaned up for 40 years now. But once that does happen, these things can happen within, 5-10 years, maybe even less.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much for putting this presentation together. I think you did a great job. Couple of questions that I have. Through Yukon Tab program, can Yukon Tab help the town put the documents together for the grants?
Okay. So the short answer would be yes. I wish one of my advisors was here currently. I think they're helping other students with their presentations to other towns. But it was part of a sort of service learning course I took last year that allowed me to help the town of Killingly in writing a cleanup grant. And in short, yes, the TAB program could be contacted and sort of pro bono used for the writing of a cleanup grant or a community-wide assessment grant, yes.
Okay,
I can't say for certain. I don't remember exactly if it was the TAB program in particular. It might have been the Municipal Assistance Program or some other acronym that Yukon uses to designate what program in particular. But Yukon does help towns, a number of towns with sites like these. Great.
And the other question, because there are owners on the site and it's not town-owned site, is it still possible for us to get the community assessment and cleanup through EPA if we don't own the site?
Yes, that's a good question. So I believe this is another thing where take me with a grain of salt, again, given my lack of expertise and sort of professional licensing. But I believe that the community-wide assessment grant can be initiated without the owners of the site being on board for it, but cleanup has to be a collaborative process, or rather cleanup has to be undertaken by the owners. It can't be undertaken by the town. So the town can conduct the community-wide assessment, but the owners have to conduct the cleanup.
Okay, so does that mean that we can use community assessment money and go on and actually do some tests of the site? Because I believe some of the owners didn't want us to.
I can jump in a little bit. So just to give you a background, in 2001, I actually wrote the grant already and brought it to the EPA, and they would be ecstatic to work with us. The only thing is we would need the owner's permission to get on to the property. To date, I haven't received the owner's permission. Not saying that there are other ways to get onto the property through the judicial and court system, but, that would have to be a town thing. We'd have to reach out to the town's attorney and do it legally rather than just, having the EPA go out there. So they'd be waiting for us to get some sort of legal backing, and then we could apply for the grant.
Does the grant cover all parcels, in like essentially the entire site and all parcels in its entirety? Or so if one, for instance, like if somebody, one owner says that. Sorry?
It would be however you write it.
Okay.
You ask them to do parcel 1, 2, 3, or all of it, or whatever.
Can we ask you to get up and state
Say
your
that in the
name?
mic.
And yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay. You can come.
You can do it.
Okay, so my understanding is that is however we write it, we can have all parcels, we can explicitly list out the parcels.
So the way it was written was, before was for Summit Castings, because there is no clear ownership for Summit Castings at the moment. I don't know, we haven't talked about everyone and all the parcels at once, so that would be another conversation with the EPA.
So in line with that, do we know the ownership of the surrounding off-site contaminated areas? Where I would think there would be more leeway for the town to be able to test?
Conservation land.
It's the conservation land, so we do have some
Yeah.
So we
access
could
to
start,
it.
that's an option to start, yeah.
And Matt, do you know if there's still monies available in both of these grant categories?
Not at this time. I could, in 2001 it was, in
Yeah.
2021 it was available.
But
It's taken a little while to get this far.
Sure.
And hopefully we'll be able to reach out again and find out.
So the next step for the health department then is to, this was a great start, this report, having all that information of what information we know and what the gaps are, and there's a lot of gap information, but then going to EPA and saying to them, how can you help us? How can we go forward? Correct?
Correct. So this is the education piece. So right now we're bringing it to the public, educating people. The next step is really figuring out what we want to do for the town-wide. How do we get access? What grants can we go for? Who we get involved.
Well, what about also at the same time or before, just going to DEP and saying, enforce the non-compliance status?
Yeah, so actually I talked to the DEP, and I don't know, they may be listening in, they said they would be. But they do have a notice of non-compliance.
Exactly.
And they may be able to be assistance, they may be able to give some assistance to us. But of course, we'll work with them.
I mean, there's been several years over time of non-compliance issuances going out, so, to the, I'm just trying to, what level of,
Since 1986.
yeah, since 1986, so at what point does it become, when you said there's judicial means to get involved, at what point do we, it's just, we were saying, just keep it, I'm having a hard time articulating this because I'm both frustrated and just
So, yeah.
confounded by the length of time this has taken.
And me too, and that's why I'm bringing it here today.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
this
This
is
is-
something that I found out about and I wanted to do more. And that's why I'm bringing it to the town, because, more should be done. And, we need to work on the next steps.
Okay.
So my suggestion first is then to definitely contact DEP and say, hey, we really want to move, we're your new the board is new, how can we move forward on this? And then, second of all, we could ask our legislators to help us, because they also have a stake in what DEP does, and then also what EPA does. And we could, seeing that there's some contamination there, we should be concerned about it, and we should move forward.
I mean, we can reach out to Senator Feeney and Representative Barrows, and, I mean, Barrows is right here in town. We can always present part of the, I guess, our initial findings, complaints, not complaints, but what we would like to see done, right? Just initially as a cursory, just to have them look into it a little bit further, maybe just a little oomph and help on the state side to get things rolling along.
Do we,
Yeah,
do
we
have
can
any
take comments.
from the
Oh, yeah.
audience? We can start with folks, and please come in, say your name, address.
Someone had their hand up in Zoom, okay.
Oh, sure, we can take Angela, if you would like to come off.
Yep. Actually, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm actually with Mass DEP. I did speak with the Director of Public Health. I do want to let you know that we are not just considering, I mean, we are looking at drafting and getting out potential documents out to the current owners of the property. There have been a lot of ownership changes. There've been a lot of financial inability statements made by previous owners. So just so you do know, Mass DEP is aware and had already been working on this. So it hasn't been lost, and I do understand your frustration.
Great, thank you for the update.
Yes, thank
So
you.
will you keep us posted on everything that's happening on your end?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, every document that we will mail out will also be copying the health department on that. And I also was speaking with the director, and I apologize, I forgot your name.
Matthew,
But
that's okay.
I will give you a call. Yes, Matt, thanks.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Know anyone from the audience? Yeah, just come up, say your name, address.
Hi, Carl Vandenboom, 109 Moore Street. First of all, thank you so much for bringing this to the attention of the town. It's been a long time coming. My wife and I are residents at our current address for about 40 years now. And we've known about the contamination back there. It didn't really come to a forefront until the parcel directly adjacent to this is coming under development. So I thank you, but I think we might be a little too late for that piece of the puzzle. But it's awesome to hear that it's going to be looked at. And I really appreciate everyone's time and effort. Thank you. Oh, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, any?
No? Okay,
Thanks for listening.
all right, well.
Who's got their hand raised? Oh, and you have your hand raised?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually, something pertaining to what Ms. Gallagher of the Mass DEP was saying. One thing I noticed when looking through the Mass DEP's document portal was that very often, I'm not sure who it was specifically. I can't really read the name tag, so I apologize for that. But someone mentioned that this has taken a very long time. And one thing I noticed looking through the document portal was just that very often, I think Mass DEP doesn't have access to the most current sort of owners of each specific parcel. And as such, when they issue these notices of noncompliances to owners, it seems to me at least that very frequently they are sent to people who are no longer the owners of the parcel. And as such, they have no, ability to act upon that noncompliance. And as such, that noncompliance notice very often may just be sort of ignored. And then nothing really happens until the next sort of step in that noncompliance process happens, whereupon maybe Mass DEP will realize that someone else is the current owner and maybe not. So I think one of the best things the town can do actually is to, I've tried to do this to the best of my ability, create a list of sort of the transferring of deed throughout the history of the site. However, the town, I think, should, it's entirely possible that since that initial sort of site information information gathering period occurred back in, I want to say, February or March. I was doing a lot of my looking through the Secretary of Commonwealth's database to find all this information. It's very possible that ownership of these parcels has already changed. It's always going through the hands of different, limited liability corporations, just different people, different names. Oftentimes it's the same people, just under, a new branding of the same LLC. So I think one of the best things the town can do really is to find the most current owner of each specific parcel, because again, it may have even changed since the report was finished. And that way, any notice of noncompliance that is issued to an individual, we can be certain that that is actually going to the right person.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Looks
you.
like Angela went up again.
Angela,
Yeah.
did your hand go up?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that, yeah, we did find some additional information on new owners even since your report was done, Owen, but thank you very much for that. It was very helpful to us to see that. I do have a team member here with me who I know has reached out to the tax office in Foxborough, but I know that sometimes municipal employees, like state employees, get extremely busy and messages get lost. So we have been doing a lot of research on this, and this has been extremely helpful. We will keep trying to make sure that we're updated on all the ownership information, and we'll see what happens. We'll definitely still, like I mentioned, we'll keep you posted. But just so you do know, we have reached out a few times, or maybe one time, to the tax office.
I think another way to play this is just, in part of further educating the town, I think one way to, and not everyone, sometimes people just can turn off when you mention the EPA or anything, and they'll be like, ugh. But one of the most interesting things I heard that you said Fire Chief mentioned was that on the old Bleachery parcel of, owned by the old Summit Casting area, that it's still in used by high school or college students. And I was like, for what purpose? That's what I wrote down initially. Like, for what purpose? Is it just being illegally accessed for parties is the best of his?
For parties.
For what?
Yeah, I can answer that. It's when we went for a site visit, I will neither confirm or deny that the door was
I'm not putting this on you. I'm just,
and you could freely access the building and walk inside, and we could find beer cans on the ground, roaches, things like that. So
Got it.
people can access it and use it really for whatever purpose they see fit currently.
yeah.
Are the buildings locked up, or you just walked right in?
Summit Casting, the door was unlocked. At least one of the doors. I couldn't say for the others. We didn't go. We went. The first building we went into was Summit Castings, or theoretically, the first building we went into was Summit Castings. After that point, certain things were observed that we said it really wasn't safe to do that again. That one picture that had the floorboards in every which helter skelter, we decided after that it was probably best to just take pictures from windows and things like that.
This question is for Ms. Gallagher. DEP, can you do something about the buildings to make sure that they're boarded up as a compliance?
Only if there's an imminent hazard under our regulations. And of course, we don't know if there's an imminent hazard unless there's some assessment work done. The imminent hazard would be an evaluation would be completed based on data that's accrued on soil and groundwater, and most of the time it would be the soil data. So yeah, even if EPA came out, if you got a grant, or you got they have a TBA, a technical brownfields assistance grant as well available, where they could do assessment out there. And if we find concentrations of, say, oil or lead or PCBs or something that's above a certain threshold, then we may require boarding up of the building or fencing off of certain areas.
And is that something that we could ask EPA to come out on short notice? If kids are out there and using the facility, we want to make sure that it's not dangerous.
Right. I'm not sure if EPA would. I'm thinking it might have to be something that comes from the town.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I mean,
Thank you.
just the historical
The,
mentions or notes here of the mold and the castings and
yeah, with the
Looks-
summer
just looks
castings,
unsafe.
there's no clear ownership, which
Right.
makes it difficult, which really does. But, I mean, puts the onus on the town to keep it safe.
okay.
Okay.
So
this is the-
Is that something that we could ask the fire department and the building department to go out there and check for the structure and?
I believe the fire department is out there regularly, and it is posted. I believe they have the red square on it, due to the fires and the structural, roof collapse and other things, so,
But
But-
one building wasn't locked.
right, no, I'm sure, yeah, I'll let them know.
Okay, thank you.
Because, I mean, I'm just looking at it in terms of, one, that kids should know better,
Yeah.
but
It should be secure.
it should be secure just to
Yes.
make sure that there's no, because you don't want to reach the point where we're not just talking about groundwater, we're talking about something more, a serious instant death, type scenario. I'm not trying to be
No,
horrifying here, but that was an interesting point to me, and I think it's also noted, the one parcel that no one talked about, or you said that there was no investigation, and I can't recall which one it was, but the one with the glue, the former glue factory one. It's a jujitsu place, an archery place, again, a lot of kids there.
Yeah.
A lot of kids there, a lot of people going in and out of there, daily for lessons and stuff, so I just, sometimes I always feel like there's always another angle you can get more support for things, and this might be it, is to really make the town understand that it's not just the Conservation Society or us, the Health Department, whining about, the environment, because even though it's critically important, sometimes some things need to hit the heart a little bit closer, and I think I just don't see why kids need to be exposed to any of this stuff, so. Okay, rant over.
Sure.
It's just a quick one.
Yeah.
You mind coming up to the mic?
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry.
Just a couple weekends ago, driving by at night, again, alluding back to the kids that are hanging out in there, and they're partying. They're mostly Mansfield kids, because my kids don't know them, so they say. I see them having barrel fires inside of the building. And knowing that it is like literally soaked with oil, it's just a matter of time where the problem's going to take care of itself.
That's interesting.
The floorboards that are in there, Owen mentioned that the sluice gate runs under that building. Those floorboards are open to the water. So at some points in there, you might just have a gap. If you fall through the floor, you might fall like 3 feet or you might fall 20. So it's crazy. At a minimum, I think the building should be just locked up, fenced down, or torn down at this point. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's a
Any other questions you have? I know the
startling
answers.
personal, no, it's a startling personal story, and those are important, it's,
Yeah. Okay, well, we have a wealth of information that we were given. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Angela, for representing the Mass DEP. Thank you, everyone that came out. We have a few next steps, and we'll go from there. I guess I'll take a motion to adjourn, but we have to do a roll call. So,
oh, sure, I'm Sophia Manos.
no, I need a motion first.
Oh, I'm sorry, to make a motion, sorry. A motion for the roll call is what we're doing?
Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, that's what I thought we were doing. When I heard roll call, I was like, oh, I'm going to do a roll call. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn at 8:15 PM. Is Paul?
Second?
Second? Okay. Robin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Aye?
Sophia.
Sophia?
Aye.
Votes aye. Betsy votes aye. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Have a great night.